Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to MetrObelisk Radio's Firefly Retrospective. Today, we are looking at the episode Shindig. Now, this episode was written by Jane Espenson. She served as a writer for one episode of Star Trek DS9 and would go on to be a writer for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the rebooted Battlestar Galactica series that came out in 2004, Dollhouse, Torchwood, and Once Upon a Time. Now, this episode of Firefly would be the only one that she wrote. Now, this episode was directed by Vern Gillum. Vern Gillum would serve as director for shows like Miami Vice, Sliders, Angel, and Jag. Now, this was Vern's first directorial credit on Firefly. And a fun fact, this was the 6th episode to air on the Fox network at the time of the show's initial release. Now, this episode opens up with yet another bar fight like the one we saw in The Train Job. The only difference here is the Serenity doesn't come in to save Malcolm and Jane. Malcolm pickpockets some guy who profits from slave labor, and that's what leads to the bar fight. Now, after this, the Serenity crew gets on to Persephone. Here is where Malcolm and Inara really part ways. Inara gets a job as a companion, while Malcolm and Jane get a job from Badger to carry some cargo off-world. The only thing that Malcolm has to do is meet the client at a ball by himself, since the client doesn't really like Badger too much. So Malcolm and Inara cross paths, and he punches out Inara's client for the way he was treating her, defending her honor, so to speak. Malcolm then unknowingly just challenged him to a duel. At first, he just takes his coat off and prepares for a fist fight. Yeah, let's go, motherfucker. Once we learn that it's not a fist fight, but a duel, he then goes, okay, let's go back to the guy who took our pistols and take care of this outside right here, right now. He then learns it's not a gun duel, but instead a duel with swords. Now, Inara helps Malcolm train with the sword, since all he knows is what end to hold a sword from, which in layman's terms basically means you don't know a whole fuck ton. Now, Malcolm gets put up in lodging, and Badger holds the Serenity crew hostage until the duel is over, because Badger has to do business with these quote-unquote high society gentlemen, and if it's found out that he helped in Malcolm escaping from the duel, then it could come back to really bite him in the ass. Now, Inara gives Malcolm crap because he still attacks her for basically being a whore by this point. But he defends it with, I may not be a fan of your profession, but at least I don't treat you like shit like the other guy over here. Now, the duel itself is where I have the biggest issue with this episode. As soon as I heard duel, I immediately thought that it was going to be a classic gentleman's duel, since Malcolm challenged a guy of high society. It's not just a stand out in the street and whoever's the quickest draw wins. A classic gentleman's duel was basically each man had a flintlock pistol, and they took 10 paces and shot at each other. If neither man died or parlayed, and parlay as a term is basically a fancy term for that just means surrender, then they each took a second shot at each other. If neither man died or parlayed after that, then it would go to swords, and that went until one of the men died or parlayed. Now, I was hoping for this approach because this could have elevated Malcolm's character in the show. If the other man parlayed in the duel, but Malcolm decided not to kill him, then Malcolm is an honorable man, and that could have opened up more doors for him. But in this episode, Malcolm has to kill the other man in order to become honorable, almost a reverse of what a gentleman's duel was. Now, he still chooses not to kill the man, and, because the man who parlayed in this society is now a coward because he's left breathing, which, again, really backwards logic there. But winning the duel did at least lead to Malcolm securing the job to offload the property for the client off-world, because Malcolm showed the guy that he was willing to go through great lengths to defend the property that he was hauling. And it's later found out that Malcolm is herding cattle off the world. And I personally found this pretty funny that now Malcolm and the Serenity crew basically became cattle herders, just without the horses and the cowboy hats. Now, personally, I think that this is one of the best standalone episodes for this show. It had its own beginning, middle, and end, which is what a good episodic TV show needs. Every now and then on an episodic TV show, it's important to have standalone episodes divorced from the primary narrative. That way the showrunners can expand upon the characters. And this was totally a Malcolm Reynolds episode by showing that he is an honorable man. I just wish that it was executed a lot better. And there isn't really a B story to this episode, unless if you take into account for Badger holding the Serenity crew hostage. But I mean, that didn't really lead to Jane forcing a mutiny and going to save Malcolm. No, the duel still happened. I think if there were a B story, it would have taken away from the gravitas that was built up, basically up to this duel. And the duel was really the central focus of this episode, just as I stated. Now, this is an episode that I've revisited several times just because of the fact that it is a nice standalone episode. I can watch this one episode and basically be done for the day. And with that out of the way, I think this is going to do it for this episode of our Firefly Retrospective. Make sure to come back next time when we look at the next episode. Safe.